Hi, today we will be talking about organic molecules. Although the cell is mostly water, and we discussed the properties of water and why water is so important for life last class, the rest of the cell consists mainly of carbon-based compounds. These compounds make up all living things on Earth. Organic chemistry is the study of those carbon compounds. The major organic compounds for life are these: proteins, nucleic acids, carbohydrates, and lipids. While we will eventually be discussing these macromolecules, we are first going to begin with something simpler and get an introduction to organic chemistry. So the first question is, why carbon? It turns out that carbon is actually very abundant in the universe, and it is also a versatile atom. If you remember from chemistry, it has 4 electrons in its outer shell, and that outer shell holds 8. That means carbon is able to bond with other elements, other atoms. In fact, carbon can share its electrons with other atoms to form up to 4 covalent bonds. Finally, carbon can form long chains, and it can also form rings. This is important because the shape of organic molecules matter. In fact, the shape determines the function in an organism. These are carbon rings, just one example of the structure that carbon-based molecules can form. So carbon's versatile bonding behavior allows it to form a variety of structures, including rings. Carbon rings form the framework of many sugars and fats, such as those found in donuts. Man, this is making me hungry. Anyways, the simplest carbon compounds are hydrocarbons. They are so simple they contain only carbon and hydrogen atoms. They can form an endless variety of carbon skeletons. Here are a few examples of hydrocarbons. We have gasoline, which is what you put into your car, unless you drive a Tesla, in which case I'm quite jealous of you. And you can see the chemical formula for gasoline over on the right. We have 8 carbon atoms and 18 hydrogen atoms. Propane is also a hydrocarbon, C3H8. And then we have methane, which comes out of cows and is gross. And that is simpler. It's 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens. Molecules of life are a little bit more complicated than simply carbon and hydrogen. They contain at least 1 functional group, in addition to that carbon and hydrogen. So what is a functional group? A functional group can be an atom or it can be a small molecule group. And the functional group causes chemical properties like acidity or polarity. Here are some functional groups that are common in biological molecules. For example, we have acetyl. You can see its structure. The characteristic that is going to give a biological molecule is polarity. It's going to make something polar and acidic. It's found in proteins and some coenzymes. You can look through some of the other ones. Here are more functional groups. You can see methyl on the bottom. You can see its structure. The characteristic is nonpolar, and it is found in fatty acids and some amino acids. The structure of complex molecules. You can start to understand how these complex molecules work by thinking of them in terms of monomers and polymers. I want you to think of a monomer as a bead and a polymer as a necklace. Long chains of monomers make a polymer the same way that a long chain of beads will make a necklace. So monomers are used as subunits to build larger molecules. They include things like sugars, fatty acids, amino acids, and nucleotides. Polymers are larger, more complex molecules that are chains of monomers. They can be split and used for energy, and we also call polymers macromolecules. Macro means big, so macromolecules are really big molecules. If you remember, we talked about them in the beginning of this lecture. Our major macromolecules are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. As you can see, the carbohydrates are actually repeating units of sugar. The monomer of carbohydrates is the sugar. Carbohydrates are useful as an energy source, and they are also a structural material. Lipids have fatty acid as their monomer, and lipids store energy and form membranes and provide insulation. Proteins have amino acids as their monomers, and proteins have the function as enzymes, structural material, and building material. Nucleic acids have long chains of nucleotides. Nucleotides are their monomer, and nucleic acids store genetic information. Examples include DNA and RNA. Cells build new polymers from monomers, and they break down polymers into monomers all the time through chemical reactions. In fact, cells have to constantly run these reactions for you to stay alive, to grow, to reproduce, to survive. The sum of all these chemical reactions is known as metabolism. So how do cells build and break down polymers? They do it through chemical reactions, and there are two main types of reactions. The first is dehydration synthesis. Dehydration synthesis is covalent bonding of two molecules to form a larger molecule. Basically, you have two things coming through together during dehydration synthesis and water forming as a byproduct. Hydrolysis is how the big stuff breaks into smaller stuff. It is the reverse of dehydration synthesis. An enzyme basically breaks apart a large organic molecule into smaller ones. This reaction requires water. Here is an example of dehydration synthesis. You have a glycerol, and you have 3 fatty acids coming together through dehydration synthesis, forming a triglyceride. And as you can see, water is released as a byproduct in the process. This is an example of the opposite. This is hydrolysis. In this case, water is added to split a double sugar. So hopefully this was a useful introduction to organic chemistry. Next time we will go on to discuss the big bad macromolecules.